Welcome, everybody, to our Collaborate session on fostering supply chain diversity. My name is Sam Healy. I'm Director of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at QinetiQ, and I'll be your host today. So just some housekeeping for the session today. You'll see that we're recording. This is what we do for most sessions, though, that we're able to put it on our website and share the session more widely. And for those that are attending, if you haven't seen our previous sessions, you can go to our Collaborate website and pick up some of the other topics that we've been talking about. We'd also love to hear any questions that attendees have today, so please do put them in the Q&A session if you can, and we'll pick them up towards the end after the panelists have spoken. So as I said, this is part of our QinetiQ Collaborate series, and this is an approach that we've taken to share best practice and ideas across our supply chain and our wider stakeholder group. We see this as a platform for learning, sharing ideas and perspectives, and recently we've covered topics such as climate change and modern slavery. We know as an organisation we just don't have all the answers, so we think it's absolutely vital and critical to our success that we create this inclusive environment where people feel comfortable to share their thoughts and ideas, and we listen to a variety of different perspectives and concepts across our sector and wider, so that we can all learn and benefit from that process. So our topic today is fostering supply chain diversity. And today we'll be talking about the benefits that we see, how it works, what it is, and perhaps some of the challenges as well, which I think will be really useful to all of us. And so it's my great pleasure today to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. Delighted to be joined today by Andrew Kinniburgh, Mike Shah, David Garrity, and Hannah Cowley. So Andrew, can I ask you to introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, and perhaps a couple of sentences on why supply chain diversity is important to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. My name is Andrew Kinniburgh. I'm Director General of Make UK Defence, which is the Defence Trade Association of Make UK, which in turn is the voice of British manufacturing. We're one of the 5 national business groups within the UK, along with the CBI, the Institute of Directors, the British Chambers, and the Federation for Small Businesses, as one of the groups that engage with the government. Supply chain diversity for me is hugely important. I represent 300 plus members of my organisation, which range from QinetiQ at the larger end of the scale down to micro SMEs with 2 or 3 employees, maybe even 1. And I think having worked with businesses like QinetiQ, who are really very enlightened in terms of engagement with SMEs and engagement with a diverse range of suppliers, it's something that's very, very important to me, and I think for our members as well. So I think the SME and the mid-tiers need a greater voice, and I think diversity of supply chain is one route to that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Welcome to the panel. And our next panelist is Mayank Shah. Mayank, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, and thanks for inviting me. My name is Mayank Shah. I'm the founder and CEO of Minority Supplier Development UK, which is known as MSD UK. We are a not-for-profit organization that I founded in 2006 to champion supplier diversity within corporate supply chain. We have worked over the last 16 years with more than 200 private and public sector purchasing organizations, and we represent over 3,000 ethnic minority businesses in our network, and helping corporations build sustainable supplier diversity program.
Fantastic, thank you and welcome. And Hannah.
Good morning. Yes, my name's Hannah Cowley. I'm the supply chain lead at QinetiQ for sustainable procurement, working very closely with Sam in corporate social responsibility. And I'm responsible for the global supplier diversity program in QinetiQ. So for me, diversity is part of the wider pillars of sustainability, picking up on the social and economic prosperity side of the levelling up agenda as well. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Lovely. Thanks, Hannah. And last but absolutely not least, Dave, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Garrity. I'm the HR manager at Inspire Limited. We're a defence company based in Lincoln. Currently in growth, but very pleased to say that we remain firmly in the high rankings of best companies to work for. Our workforce is 77% ex-military, including myself. I had a 26-year career in the Navy. My interest in supply chain diversity really extends to playing my part in the levelling up plan. COVID-19 has not been the great leveller as it thought it would be, and I think it has highlighted inequality that sadly still exists, especially those from an economically deprived areas being hit the hardest. So that's my view on that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Great. So we'll start the session, and I'm going to ask the panelists a series of questions to prompt the conversation. So my first question, and I'm going to point this first to Andrew and Mank, so perhaps if you can go in that order, is perhaps just to really set the scene and be really clear, what we mean by supplier diversity. So Andrew, perhaps over to you.
Thanks, Samantha. I suppose thinking about it, there's I suppose three main aspects to supplier diversity. The first one is operational, obviously, in that your supply chain cannot afford to have a single point of failure where you have an individual company or an individual within a company that is your only source of a particular part or a particular skill or service. I think diversity in terms of an operational mix of suppliers, perhaps of similar or the same parts. I think there's diversity in geography as well. I think there's certainly. I'm mainly focused on the UK market, so I would sort of bring in the levelling up agenda there in terms of bringing more a more diverse geographical view to things, and not just a cluster perhaps around the factory that you're running, but broaden it out beyond that, and to look at areas that perhaps are underrepresented geographically. And in particular, the northeast of England would spring to mind. That's a region within the UK that really is badly underrepresented within the defence industry. So it's an area that we're very keen on. And then so that's domestically. Internationally, I think certainly we've seen in the UK in recent years the risk of things like the exports licensing regimes in countries putting at risk the supply chain. So if we look particularly maybe at Germany with regard to operating in Saudi Arabia, if you have a single company based in Germany that is providing you with equipment that's then going into Saudi Arabia, you may well have some problems. If we look at the UK, the Export Control Joint Unit, while Shanila, the lady that runs it, the director of that unit, is working incredibly hard, the geopolitics of areas like Syria are making it extremely difficult to get export licenses, for instance, for countries like Turkey, which could potentially impact both large and small businesses. And then I think when governments are encouraging companies to go on sort of government-sponsored trade missions and then not granting licenses, it's deeply frustrating, particularly for the SMEs who may well have spent a lot of money. And then I suppose the final bit is diversity of individuals, and again, that's something that we feel very passionately about in Make UK and Make UK Defence. So diversity in terms of I think the defence industry tends to be very male dominated. It tends to be white male dominated as well, and really we've got to work a lot harder at developing women in defence into senior roles and making sure that the what could be termed the inconvenience of having a family doesn't impact a career, and that you can come in and out of the workforce at the same level that you left it at. So I think there's that side of things. I think ethnically we need to have a much more diverse industry as well, and certainly things like people with disabilities, bringing many more of those people into the defence industry as well. So I think that would be my kind of summary, although very long-winded summary at that. Thank you.
No, Andrew, that's great. And Mike, do you share Andrew's view? Do you have some additional aspects you'd like to build on that?
I think Andrew covered quite a lot of things which I resonate with. The common theme in your discussion was about underrepresentation, and I go back to a famous quote from Reverend Jesse Jackson that when everyone is included, everyone wins. And if you think on those issues, those lines, what we are talking about, procurement is a great enabler when it comes to reducing inequality. And when you talk about supply chain diversity, is about inclusion of underrepresented, socially, economically disadvantaged groups and regions in your supply chain. And I think that is important. But the pandemic has also shown us how supply chains were disrupted, because over-reliance on global supply chain had a huge impact on companies over here, purchasing organizations. And supply diversity provides you that alternate option, which is much more local, much more nearer to your operations, and that helps you maintain that continuity in the supply chain. So I think supply diversity is just not about inclusion of underrepresented groups, but also it's about trying to be, I always say that this is a smarter procurement, by trying to have an alternate option that helps you in times of troubles, trouble times. We had a great example during COVID where many of our minority businesses based over here in this country were able to help large purchasing organizations sustain their supply chain through continuous supply chain of supply of PPE products. So that's a good example.
Great. And I think just building on that, would you like to perhaps just expand a little bit on why you think it's so important to have a diverse supply chain? So we're starting to touch on some of those topics, but are there any particular aspects you'd like to bring out, Mike, on the benefits and why it matters?
We focus at MSD UK on giving access to businesses that are owned by ethnic minorities. And last year, we did one of the largest ever research on ethnic minority businesses in this country and their contribution to the economy. And we found out that 1 million out of 6 million businesses registered on Companies House are ethnic minorities led. So 16% of the businesses registered on Company House. They employ 3 million people. That is 10% of UK's workforce. And they contribute 78 billion. So by excluding them consciously or unconsciously from your supply chain is a big issue, because you are missing out on entrepreneurial sort of that whole focus of ethnic minorities. Most of them are immigrants to this country. They want to succeed and they have the drive to succeed. And the customer service, the innovation they bring, the different way of doing business, that is something that supply chains miss out if they do not include those businesses.
I think the innovation point is coming out really strongly there. I don't know, Andrew, or perhaps Hannah, do you want to add to benefits that you see of the defence, sort of a more diverse supply chain?
I would definitely say innovation is one of the key areas, particularly from the wider sustainability agenda. As we move towards a net zero future, the need for our supply chains to support us in technology and products and services that are lower greenhouse gas emissions, but without having that wider social impact. The need for innovation moving forward is just going to grow, and we need a wider pool of innovative suppliers. And also, I think there's actually going to be a bit of a step change for defence, because I think we're going to be turning towards in some cases towards non-traditional defence suppliers to get some of these solutions. They're solutions that exist in other sectors, so you're going to have that cross-sectoral pull through. And we've got to be a lot more open to it, receptive to it. So I think there are huge benefits, and to me, innovation is pretty much the key to all of that at the moment. Definitely in the near future, when we look at that net zero agenda.
Thank you. Andrew, did you want to add to that, or are there additional points?
If I may, yeah, I think particularly with a sort of focus on SMEs, I think as well as innovation, you get creativity and you get speed of response. I think having worked for and with some of the largest businesses in the UK in defence, they can be lumbering giants to some extent. And I think when you work with an SME, the decision-making tree is so much smaller and shorter and punchy, and you can just you can clear stuff through and get on with it. So I think speed of response. I think as well, the other issue I think is around things like social values, because as we know now, the MOD is very actively engaging on social values. I think we've still got lots of questions for MOD and for the primes about how that will practically roll out into the bid phase of contracts, because there isn't clarity yet, and we're pushing really hard for that. But I think if you aren't looking at a diverse supply chain in all the aspects that we've talked about, you simply aren't going to get the 10% or the 20% of the marks attached to social values. So whilst you can be as diverse and wonderful an organization as you like, if that doesn't flow down into your supply chain, you potentially are putting at risk your scoring on these competitive tenders. So I think not only is it good for business, but actually it will help you win work as well.
Brilliant. And I think the way that you've expressed it is, it's so important. This isn't a tick box exercise. This is genuine benefit, both to the supply chain and also to those that are customers procuring those services as well, which is great. Hannah, from a global perspective, are we seeing different sorts of trends in different countries, or are we seeing a similar approach? Is anyone further ahead?
There's definitely countries that are further ahead. I mean, absolutely leading the way is probably the US. They've had it legislated, but the Small Business Act was legislated back in 1953, so they're miles ahead of probably where we are in the UK. And they started building it in contractually. If we take QinetiQ, our QinetiQ colleagues based in the US as an example, I know, for instance, that they have a small business program advisor, and part of that role is promoting supplier diversity, and they do the whole spectrum. There's not just that focus on size diversity around SMEs. They are regulated around women-owned, veteran-owned. So you see a lot more of that in terms of thresholds that they have to achieve in contracts, so their FARs and DFARs through coming through federal contracts, and they're reporting on it. So they've got that mechanism already in place. That, you know, they have established bidders lists that include diverse suppliers, and they're rotating their approved supplier list, but they're working with, you know, organisations like MSD UK and Make UK. You know, they're using these advocacy organisations much better. They're attending or participating a lot more in what they call matchmaker events, and they're working with local procurement technical assistants like enterprise zones, or I think they call them enterprise hubs in America. So they're doing all of that, and they're looking at, you know, contractual clauses, the way they onboard. So, you know, it's more business as usual, as opposed to thinking about it quite separately. But they are taking that holistic picture, whereas I think, you know, predominantly in the UK, what's been coming out of government departments is very much a focus on size diverse, as opposed to the wider diverse picture, until sort of social value came along. But then if you look at the other side of the planet, in terms of our Australian colleagues, they've been doing a lot of work around Indigenous participation through the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So they're including, they've got a reconciliation action plan as part of what they're doing. They're working very actively to engage with either Indigenous owned or suppliers that have Indigenous populations as part of their workforce. And, you know, it's not about positive discrimination. They're just being more inclusive in their tender process, and then the suppliers are winning on their own merit. But what, you know, that's the whole point of supplier diversity, is that we're making it equitable and a fair access to be able to participate in tenders. So, you know, I think we've got a lot to learn from other nations, and, you know, build on existing good practices that we've already started around the size diverse agenda.
Great.
Yeah, if I can, I may just add on to that, is absolutely, you know, the US has been the leader in supplier diversity. But what I'm seeing over the last 3 or 4 years is the growth of supplier diversity across the world. So as part of MST UK's future plans, we are going into Europe. So we have started in 6 countries: France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, and Ireland and Sweden. And at the same time, we have just established a global supplier diversity alliance. This is looking at Latin America, looking at Asia Pacific and African countries. So it's all about trying to reach out to underrepresented entrepreneurial groups in all these countries. And when you focus on ethnic minorities, the definition keeps changing because the constituents keeps changing in each countries, you know. So when you are in Germany, you're talking about Kurdish and Turkish population who are the minorities over there. So it's a very complicated sort of jigsaw puzzle when you talk about focusing on people of color and ethnic minorities, but it's an interesting space to be at this moment.
Great. So I think the argument is compelling, and we're seeing this global spectrum, perhaps slightly different approaches and some nuance. So I'd like to move us on now to perhaps some of the challenges that sit around how do we make this work, and make it work effectively, and again, so that we're avoiding a tick box and actually we're moving towards something that truly benefits all of us. Meg, I was just going to touch back to you because a couple of years ago there was a fantastic paper that you co-wrote with SIPS, and there was some really great aspects in there about some of the barriers. Perhaps you'd be able to share some of your key thoughts around maybe what some of the challenges of doing this effectively for procurement departments.
I think the first thing that I would do, and I've done my PhD on supplier diversity before I started MST UK, and I always think that when the focus of supplier diversity in any purchasing organization is about measuring spend, then it defeats the purpose, because I truly believe that supplier diversity also should include supplier development, because it's about investing in those underrepresented entrepreneurs so they can become bigger, so that they can create jobs in local regions, underrepresented, socially disadvantaged groups, you know. So that is important, that you invest in supplier development so that your future supply chains can be more diverse and inclusive. Also, it's about capacity building. When you talk about supplier development, it's about capacity building. Thirdly, and I think Andrew would agree with me, when it comes to SMEs, the biggest issue at the moment is cash flow. And as I think purchasing organizations and UK government has started this initiative of prompt payment through SMEs, 30 days payment. I think that's very critical for any small business. Cash is king and cash is important. So how can, within the supplier diversity program, companies can pledge for prompt payments to small businesses? That is something that we are trying to develop a pledge, supplier diversity pledge, where every more than 100 corporate members that we have are going to sign on that, and that's about committing to 30 days payment. So these are some of the challenges, but also for SMEs, whether they are diverse or non-diverse, it's about access to opportunities. You know, how do they know that there is opportunities that they can compete for? It's about creating that level playing field and giving them a seat on the table to compete with others. But then when you talk about, especially with QinetiQ and in this area of defense, the entry options are so difficult for any SMEs. How can we relax some of those entry point barriers that exist at the moment? We need to make procurement much more simplified for to give them really good access to your opportunities.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Would anybody else like to build on those points, or perhaps some of the barriers?
I was going to agree. You know, working in a procurement function, obviously one of the big things that we like is standardized processes, standardized ways of doing things, you know, and it is that to remove some of those barriers and be more engaging. One size does not fit all. You know, we have due diligence pre-supplier qualification for a reason. It's there to safeguard risk against us as a business, but obviously that comes with very time-consuming questionnaires. A lot of our processes around high value contracting, there's usually a lot of onerous paperwork. So there's elements as a procurement function that we need to look at to address that, to be more inviting to SMEs, and particularly in the defence industry. I talked about before saying that, you know, we needed to look at non-traditional defence. Well, there's a whole lot of jargon that needs to be overcome to be able to do that, because, you know, defence, we're all a big fan of the 3-letter acronym, aren't we? So it's the other thing about procurement is, you know, we've had a long tradition of policy preferred suppliers, you know, leveraging spend with a smaller number of suppliers. You know, we've got to change, and to pick up on your point, Mayank, pick up on supplier relationship management and that supplier performance management, and maybe take a bit more of a mentoring, supportive role to be able to include the smaller suppliers. But at the same time, it's not just our immediate direct tier 1 SMEs, of which of course we do need, but it's about promoting a supplier diverse ecosystem, encouraging our tier 1 suppliers and their suppliers, you know, so that SMEs appear throughout the supply chain, that they're you know, encouraged and embedded, and, you know, breaking up bigger pieces of work, you know, making it smaller and more accessible. I think the other thing where, you know, we need to use organisations like yourself with MSD UK and Make UK is that matchmaking capability, access. You know, we don't necessarily know the suppliers we're going to need, and they definitely might not have visibility of us. So we need that assistance to have that improved accessibility and visibility, I think.
Andrew, Dave, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
May I just add a couple of bits? I completely agree, and I think Mayank's point on prompt payment is absolutely spot on, and there is no excuse for any prime contractor not to be paying on 30 days. And I've seen many of them wriggling and squirming on these calls when we raise these issues, because they don't like it. But we're still seeing primes paying companies on 75, even 90-day payment terms with MOD signed up to the prompt payment code. It's an absolute disgrace. So we're very passionate about that and completely share Mayank's view on that. I think that what we talk about is the democratization of defense, which is maybe an unfortunate mix of words given what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. But things like the JOSCAR, the Joint Supply Chain Register, which is a wonderful thing if it's used effectively. And we know QinetiQ have signed up to that and are great sort of exponents and sort of promoters of it. When it's used well, it's fantastic, because it allows small businesses to effectively, in large part, pre-qualify before they actually are on contract. So it helps to broaden that supply chain diversity. I think the issue that we have with it is that you need to be nominated by a prime. So you've almost got to be in the club before you're allowed to join, which seems to me to be wrong, but we understand there are processes going through. There's a new initiative coming through with JOSCAR, which is, its working title is JOSCAR Lite, which is looking to open up membership of JOSCAR on a sort of more informal basis, which will be open to all, which we really encourage. And that is a sort of stepping stone. It doesn't win you any work. It doesn't make you invincible, or you're going to be top of everybody's procurement lists. But what it does do is it shows that you have an interest and a desire to be in the defence world. So I think we like that. And the final thing, which doesn't make me very popular again, is the primes being lazy. don't be lazy, and same to MOD. Don't be lazy. Don't just stick with the suppliers you've had for the last 20 years simply because you can't be bothered to change them. And I say that I'm being very emotional, perhaps deliberately to garner some sort of response. But we've got two members in membership of Make UK Defence. One makes davits, so naval shipborne cranes. Another one makes naval guns. They supply almost every capital ship in the US Navy and the US Coast Guard. They're on no Royal Naval programs. The davits are made in Dudley in the West Midlands. The guns are made in Norfolk in the east of England, and they're not on any Royal Navy programs. Why is that? And maybe the laziness word creeps in again. I'll probably get shot down in flames by my friends in the naval world, but I just thought I'd make those points. Thank you.
Andrew, I think it's Hannah touched on the point about risk. Is I think organisations, there's an element here of if you go with what you know, you go with what's safe, and I think that's part of the wider diversity inclusion conversation more widely. Is sometimes we just need to step back and think about the benefits and how they outweigh, and bringing in that innovation. And people do feel that there is some risk associated with innovation, but if we don't hear those great ideas, or we don't try new organisations or new partnerships, we can't foster that spark of generation of innovation. And I think that's something that we're passionate about. QinetiQ is, innovation is just a core part of our strategy. Is that recognition of perhaps bringing new organisations together is a really stimulating aspect, and I know we do that very successfully through our Vivace programme. So fab. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have any points they'd like to raise on perhaps some of the challenges either for big business or for smaller organisations, is how to grow more diversity in the supply chain?
One aspect that I would like to add over here is about our young generation of entrepreneurs that are coming up, the startups. And we at MSD UK have been running innovation challenges, sort of a dragon's den or pitch competition for last 5-6 years. And everything is focused on the theme of that competition is better ideas for a better world, and that's linked with the ESG and environment and sustainability. And I can tell you, some of the most amazing ideas are coming from those young people at universities. We work with around 30 universities across the country, but we all know that these young entrepreneurs work from co-working spaces. This is the gig economy, and they would never get onto any procurement roster just because lack of infrastructure. But the ideas they bring are absolutely amazing. How can procurement, how can large organizations facilitate that of inclusion of those young entrepreneurs? That's another big challenge.
So I think that's a great point, because again, that brings in that additional facet of diversity is around age. And again, I think as a sector, and I'm saying this personally, I'm not casting any aspersions, but we're not getting any younger. I think making sure that we're creating that pipeline, not just for our own workforces, but actually for our supply chain is critically important.
And that's where diversity, when we're looking at suppliers, it's not just the supplier themselves, as in, what's their size, what's their ownership status, where are they located? Our supply chain is an extension of us as a business. So I'm interested in their workplace diversity, that you've not got that group think developing, that actually there is diverse thinking because they've got a diverse workforce, and they're the types of suppliers that we want to be encouraging and including in our supply base.
Brilliant. Dave, I was going to move to you and talk, perhaps share the approach that you're taking in Inspire, which is a very exciting and dynamic organisation. Perhaps the approach that you're taking, or the connections with sort of is that bridge, isn't it, between a D&I approach within an organisation and how that extends out into the supply chain. So I don't know if you want to share your thoughts and approach.
Yeah, sure. So Inspire, you may have recalled, said 77% are ex-military. And picking up on Andrew's point, yes, we are quite white male dominated as well. And what we're trying to do is build a strategy at the moment without discriminating or unlawfully setting quotas to recruit from a specific number of portion of people with a protected characteristic, for example. As part of that plan, we hired a recent graduate from university to look at Generation Z and how we can interface those from an ex-military background to complete different ways of working, different ways of thinking. And we're starting to see the benefit of that already. We hired an intern from Lincoln University who is absolutely just been brilliant. What we didn't want to run the risk of, though, with that individual is making them the poster boy of saying, do you know what, look what we've done. We've gone to this university, we've got this great young person. Because it's not fair on him. He wanted to join the company to do the role and not just be the poster boy of, oh, look what I've done. So we are in an improved position now. We know historically that we probably can't recruit as many from diverse areas because, look at defence, people think, that's just a white male dominated environment. Why would I want to join that? So these are the challenges that we're trying to work through at the moment. And it's been great to listen to everyone's viewpoints today and how we can start to look at that.
Right, and I think brilliant that you've touched on the Gen Z, and we've picked up that age piece as well. So, I do think there is a risk because I think with us on this session, I think we're all convinced of the benefits. But we do hear that focusing on diversity and inclusion is a box tick or it's positive discrimination. What would anybody say as an argument against that, to say actually that's not true? Have you heard that argument regularly? Is that something that you're dealing with? And perhaps what is the way that you counter that argument?
I would say from a procurement point of view, I think what we need to get better at is the inclusion in the tendering process. I don't think suppliers want to think that they were selected purely on that they were fulfilling a quota. They want to know that they won a contract fairly and squarely. I think what we've got to get better at doing is if we do all those other things, that we make it simpler for entry, and then they're going to want to participate. They're going to want to come forward and be part of tenders. It's obviously some of the things that we do is quite unique or quite niche, and it's finding diverse suppliers that have those capabilities. I think that's the bit we've definitely got to get better at finding them, but that doesn't mean they're not out there and that they don't exist. And I think part of that innovation is potentially using things in a different way that already exist. So to me, it's marrying it all up together so that when we apply our source to contract processes and our acquisition processes, that the suppliers still selected based on merit and capability and competency to fulfill the requirement. That does not matter whether they're a large company or a smaller micro company. If we've broken up the bigger tender, the bigger bid piece into appropriate chunks, I think then we're making it accessible to them and giving them a fair chance of participating. But you hear of it, that I think that, again, going back to being risk adverse, I think that's what people think is going to happen, and it's then perception versus reality. But we need to make the reality is my point, and just adapt some of our processes to facilitate that.
Maybe that builds on the equality versus equity argument, which is it isn't a level playing field. So actually what we've got to do is take the responsibility to remove the barriers so everyone has an opportunity to participate. And then and I think this is the key bit for me, is that we unleash that talent, those skills that are out there, not because it's a super and nice thing to do, but actually genuinely it's a benefit to everybody, that otherwise we're just not harnessing that skill and that innovation and that capability out there. So it's about focusing on reducing barriers, not giving some sort of artificial opportunity where it's not merited.
Absolutely. And QinetiQ is something QinetiQ's already good at. We already have a very good SME population, so picking up on the wider supplier diversity. It's just something that we, learn the lessons from our colleagues around, around the globe, and apply it to our company globally.
Does anyone else have a thought or a comment on how we balance
Yeah,
that?
I think you asked about the question whether is it positive discrimination. I always say it's not positive discrimination, it's positive action, because what no one wants, and I agree with Hannah that no supplier wants to win a contract because of who they are, but because of what they bring to the table. But they need a seat at the table. That's where outreach is important, reaching out to those underrepresented groups that are not you won't find in normal circumstances. So how do you do that? So working with organizations like Make UK, MSD UK, so that we can give you access to those fantastic suppliers. I think the other thing that I would like to add over here is when you talk about removing barriers for businesses, one of the key aspects is about educating them about your process, because there's a lack of awareness about education, about how do you, because it's almost like, okay, we can't serve a industry, defense industry, because there are so many barriers. But if you can, working with organizations like Make UK, MSD UK, and other organizations, explain, run lunch and learn sessions at these with our suppliers to provide information about that it's not that difficult, address some of those barriers and educate suppliers so that they can, when they come and pitch for business and put up a proposal, they know what they need to do to win the business. That's very important.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for that. We've now got some questions coming through from our audience. So if you're happy, I'd like to just ask the first couple of questions to you. So we've got a question that comes through around the cost of bidding, and I think this probably builds on some of the comments that you've already made. But I think, are there ways of just really, as perhaps large buying departments to smaller businesses, because I suspect this may be an SME challenge, is around minimising the cost of bidding, or recognising that's a challenge for SMEs? And I don't know if anybody'd like to take that question. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, I'd love to just comment on that. I think it's extremely challenging for young businesses and for micro SMEs and indeed SMEs. And I think when you look at something like social values, which is obviously being rolled out and as we mentioned before is now directly impacting your ability to win contracts. MOD's view of sort of quite laissez-faire, take the 3 priority social values and apply them as you will primes. It makes it incredibly challenging for a small business that might be bidding into 3 or 4 of those prime contractors bidding for the same work and being asked the three priority social value questions in entirely different ways. So whilst I applaud the creativity and, interpret it as you like, it actually for SMEs makes life almost impossible, because they could be asked the same 3 questions in 4 different ways. And how on earth do you support that? And what we always say in Make UK Defence is that complexity is the enemy of the SME. The more complex you make it, the more resource heavy you need to to meet the challenges. It just precludes SMEs and young businesses from getting involved. So I think that would certainly be, simplify. This is the thing. I mean, I don't know if any of you, probably many of you will be aware of the whole sort of defence lines of development with MOD and how they develop a requirement through the sort of life cycle. They need another S in there, which is simplify. How do we simplify, strip away complexity, and encourage SMEs and young businesses to get involved? So I think they've got to think about simplifying, and organizations like QinetiQ do a lot of work in that, and JOSCAR is one of those things that does help to reduce complexity by being a one-to-many pre-qualification questionnaire. It just needs to be used properly and consistently, and I know QinetiQ does do that, but yeah, so those sort of things, I think.
Thanks. Hannah, I don't know if you've got a comment from an in-house perspective on, perhaps how organisations can look at bidding costs. You've got any thoughts?
I think it's one of those ones that it goes back to, are we wanting to support suppliers? I think definitely if there is particularly new or emerging technologies or particular innovations that we're interested in, I think as part of our internal make team buy decisions, we've got to factor in that there could be additional costs in supporting the suppliers to do that. I definitely think it becomes part of a wider decision-making piece, as opposed to allowing the supplier to think about it completely on their own. But what you want to facilitate is the fact that the suppliers can come forward and say, I'm very interested, however, this is a challenge for me. And the thing is, obviously, during the bidding process, you've got to allow it to be fair, but in some situations there are single source situations. So, it completely depends on the context of the bid or the project being worked on, the product or innovation available. Obviously we have to be ethical, we have to be seen to be neutral. But if there are areas where we can facilitate making that easier, and that might not be directly attributed to costings and fundings, but it could be, as Andrew was alluding to, efficiencies in other areas, that pre-qualification, the way we ask for responses to tenders. I think, if we can make that, streamline those areas, we can assist smaller suppliers to participate.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to our next question, and I think perhaps we've touched on points, but it'd be worth bringing it out more strongly, is how can diverse suppliers, and whatever we want to call those aspects, whether it's small or geographic or from an ethnic minority or social background, whatever it is, how can those suppliers go about increasing their visibility and making sure that we can reach them? Does anyone have any thoughts?
This is an open goal for me, I guess, and perhaps for Mayank as well.
Yeah.
Is to join a trade association.
Okay.
Because that is, and it's not the only way, of course, but that would certainly be a way of increasing visibility. We certainly, like Mayank, we run things like emerging technology meet the buyer events, where we're quite purposely looking to attract non-defense companies into the room to have a discussion with organizations like QinetiQ and the other major players in the defense supply chain. So I think that's certainly one way. It's not the only way. I would say, turbocharge your social media, get your LinkedIn profiles going, start tagging in loads of people, individuals and businesses like Make UK Defence, like ADS and the other big trade associations, and just get involved. I think go to events and be seen and ask questions at events like this. So yeah, I would say, but obviously join Make UK Defence is the top
Absolutely.
priority, clearly.
That's okay, fun. Brilliant. Mayank, did you want to build on that at all?
No, I think Andrew has done a really good sales pitch. Yes, yeah. See, the problem in this country is that the government doesn't monitor ownership or size of business. That's the biggest issue: lack of data. And Hannah touched upon how advanced America is and the US is, and it's because every 4 years in that country there is an economic census that happens that captures every single detail of every single business in America. So if you want to find a defense contractor, a small business with less than 10 people in certain part of America, you will have that data. We don't have that data. So although I'm here for MSQKSF for 16 years, we don't know where ethnic minority businesses are. We have to use word of mouth and recommendation and referrals to find those businesses. And I think that's the biggest barrier. So from this, one of the things that we always keep talking about, I think social media has helped us a lot by raising profile and raising awareness. But we organize, like Make UK, a number of meet the bar events and business opportunity days and try to engage with businesses. But yeah, they have to engage with us so that we can give them visibility to our networks.
And do you see any change in that with with improvements in data or improvements in data capture? Because I do see that supplier diversity is going up and up the agenda. Do you think
Yeah.
there's a point at which this is just going to be inevitable in the UK?
I think we have been speaking to a number of people at the cabinet office and Crown Commercial Services and other organizations, and the simplest way of doing this is Company House requires every registered business to submit an annual report every year. Can we ask that question, a few questions about size, number of people you are employing, and your ownership? It's simple addition of 3 or 4 questions at Company House annual submission, and we will have good data. So it's not complicated. We are living in times when technology is making everything is so easy. It's just that government needs to catch up with technology and use that for good effect.
I also think it's utilising and reaching out better to organise, in the UK, we've got things like catapult centres and regional tech hubs and enterprise zones, and there's defence clusters and local enterprise partnerships. I don't think we fully utilise these, and they're particularly there regionally as well. I think we've got to get much better at facilitating that kind of outreach. Not just the meet the buyer events, but getting when we've got early visibility of forthcoming bids and things like that, starting that early engagement, going out to these organisations and organisations like yourself to make those potential matchmaker and see the potential suppliers that are out there. I just don't think we're fully utilising things that are actually already there.
And just touching on JOSCAR, because we've mentioned it a couple of times, would that capture some of this information within the JOSCAR
It is.
database?
So JOSCAR, the main JOSCAR, going back to Andrew's point that they're looking at a JOSCAR Lite, although I think they're changing that name, aren't they? But the main JOSCAR is going through an update in April, so a new version of it. I think they're moving it all onto cloud-based, so I think it's actually going to look very different. But as part of that update, I know that we've been engaged with the other primes of putting additional questions in to cover the wider ESG agenda, but definitely one of those was, could you please include ownership? So JOSCAR's already very good. It does include, it even asks about micro, so it does differentiate between micro, small, medium and large. Obviously it's covered off regionally because we get county, country, postcode and other state information if they're global. So the next bit is to include that ownership status. So if we can get that information through JOSCAR, but then if we have that added benefit that rather than the invite that suppliers can self-nominate, hopefully it'll be a match made in heaven post April or post June, isn't it? That I think JOSCAR Lite's going to be launched in the summer. So hopefully this year we will start to get that improved data because as everyone says, what you measure is what you can improve and work on. So if we can have better visibility, we can start to make positive inroads.
Right, thank you.
Samantha, may I just give a little example of the challenges that Hannah and Mayank have been talking about in terms of measurement? We're the lead trade association on the SME working group, and one of the work streams that's flowing out of that within the MOD's SME working group within the Defence Suppliers Forum is measurement, and it's measurement of SME spend, because it's extremely difficult to arrive at an accurate figure. MOD actually pay an auditor to look at their supply chain directly with SMEs, so that's a relatively accurate one. But many of the primes are. I'm being very harsh on the primes, and they are our friends, and we work very closely with the primes. But we're also there to challenge. That's part of our role. Forgive me, but. One of the challenges is that the SME spend from the primes is not audited, and it is simply mark your own homework and send in the data, and then MOD present it as fact. And so one of the work streams is examining that and how we could measure that better. So I mean, that's at a very basic level of data. Of course, when you get, as Mayank was saying, when you get down into much more detail about ethnic minorities, or sexual orientation, or those some much richer data sets, there just simply isn't the information there. So I think that is a big challenge.
I think you raise a great point, and I think as we see the emphasis and scrutiny on the wider ESG agenda, that verification of data, I think, just becomes more important. So thank you for raising that. Sadly, our time is just about coming to a close. So I just wanted to give all of you an opportunity, if you were to perhaps just one key takeaway on this supply chain diversity topic to share, from your perspective. I'd love to, it gives you an opportunity if we haven't perhaps touched on something, but so perhaps just going around if there was just one thing you wanted to share as a takeaway for our audience. Andrew, I'm going to start with you.
This sounds like a shameless plug, but I would just say get involved. Get it, and it doesn't need to be Make UK Defence. It could be ADS, it could be Tech UK, it could be the Society of Maritime Industries. Get involved. It's worth spending a few £100 on a membership. If you're a micro SME, get yourself on the map. Get involved in a trade association, or perhaps with Mayank's organisation. Get involved. Get active once you've joined. Get your social media flowing, and you'll be amazed at the impact that potentially you can have. So join something and get involved, get active.
Brilliant. And Mayank, what about you?
I think it's time for procurement transformation. If we really want to make supplier diversity work effectively, simplify procurement process, make access easy, educate SMEs about how to be successful, how to be not fearful of all the procurement jargons, make it easy, and for SMEs, as Andrew said, get involved, because we have seen so many of ethnic minority businesses. It's very easy for them to pay £300 annual membership of MSD UK, but then they don't give time. It's important, as Andrew mentioned, about get visible in the network. People buy from people. That's the essence. That's the bottom line. People buy from people. But if you don't come to events and don't build up relationships, you're not going to get a £1 million contract overnight. SMEs need to work on that and understand procurement process, understand minimum qualification that is needed to be on your supply chain. So they need to invest time. That is important.
Thank you. And Dave, do you have any last things you'd like to share?
Yeah, there was a research study by Deloitte who showed that D&I enhances innovation by 20%. So I'd just like to say, just be conscious of your unconscious bias.
Great point. Thank you. And Hannah, just finally with you.
I think to build, I agree with everything that's just been said, but also, for those suppliers that you do want to work with, if you are wanting to work with QinetiQ, go onto our website. We have email addresses, we have points of contact where you can make contact with us directly. Put yourself forward, nominate, take that brave leap and put yourself forward, and shamelessly sell what it is that your innovations and your product service offerings, because it goes back to that we might not know what we need right now. Your next thing could be just around the corner that we actually need. So make yourself known to us, and we'll follow the guidance of Andrew, Dave and Mayank, and improve ourselves internally as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much. It's been a fantastic conversation on a really interesting and important topic. So thank you all very much, and thank you to our attendees today. Thank you very much.